If someone had told me on my wedding day that 4 months later I'd be here telling this story, I probably would have laughed or cried, because that day I truly believed everything was in the right place, that love was enough, that the looks, the vows, the embraces would last longer than any uncertainty. But no one talks about what happens after the party, when the lights go out, and all that's left is the silence between two people who promised everything to each other. I tried not to see what was already there. I tried to love for two too, fight for two, to trust for two, until the day I found something that shattered everything, a hidden phone. And what was inside it changed everything. Maybe you need to hear this story until the end. And if somewhere along the way it touches you, I invite you to subscribe so we don't go through this alone. Not anymore. In the beginning, everything felt like a dream I didn't want to wake up from. I remember the way he looked at me during breakfast, as if just seeing me in his shirt made his entire day better. He'd bring me coffee with just the right amount of sugar, kiss my forehead without needing a reason, and whisper plans for the future like they were soft lullabies meant only for me. We talked about adopting a dog, about traveling to the south together, about how we'd decorate the house once we finally moved out of that tiny apartment. I kept thinking, this is what love looks like. We laughed at burnt dinners, turned grocery shopping into an adventure, and made up songs while folding laundry. There were moments when I'd catch myself smiling out of nowhere just because he existed, because we existed. And yet, looking back now, I wonder if I missed things I should have noticed. There were little signs I brushed aside, like how he never left his phone unlocked, how he'd quickly change screens when I walked into the room, or how he suddenly started taking longer showers. I convinced myself it was nothing. Everyone has their quirks, I thought. Besides, he always came home, always kissed me goodnight, always said he loved me, and I needed to believe in that. Maybe because I wanted our love to be different from all the stories I had seen fall apart around me. I didn't want to be suspicious. I didn't want to be the paranoid wife, so I ignored the way his mood shifted every time I brought up our future. I pretended not to notice how he avoided conversations about children, or how he brushed off my questions with laughter that didn't quite reach his eyes. We still had good days, plenty of them. Days where we binge-watched shows until dawn, shared secrets under the covers, and danced barefoot in the kitchen. But there was a quiet beginning to something else, something I didn't have words for at the time. A distance that didn't look like distance yet. I held on to the beautiful parts tightly, like wrapping myself in a warm memory even as the cold began to seep in through the cracks. Love, when it's new, has a way of blinding us. You see only what you want to see, and I wanted to see forever in his eyes. I wanted to believe the way he held my hand in public meant something solid, something real. But even in those first months, there were nights I went to sleep wondering if I was loving too loudly, while he was slowly stepping back. I silenced the doubt with kisses, covered the cracks with affection. I kept telling myself, we're adjusting. It's normal. Everyone says the first year of marriage is the hardest. So I buried my fear in routines. I cleaned the house like it could scrub away the unease. I cooked his favorite meals, hoping to stir up whatever sweetness we had in the beginning. I dressed up for him, even when I didn't feel like it, just to see his eyes light up like they used to. Sometimes they did, sometimes they didn't. I remember one night specifically, he was on the couch, laughing at something on his phone, and I walked in wearing the dress I wore on our second date. He looked up, smiled, and went back to whatever he was doing. I stood there longer than I should have, waiting for something more. I didn't get it, but I still told myself it was okay. I told myself love changes, that comfort sometimes looks like silence. And silence, I thought, didn't mean absence. But deep down, something small inside me had started to ache. Not loudly, not yet, but it was there. It lingered in the way I watched him more carefully. It whispered in the back of my mind when I caught him staring too long at nothing. Still, I refused to believe anything was wrong. Because when you love someone that deeply, your heart becomes an expert in building excuses. And I was building them every day, like bricks in a wall I didn't know I was going to crash into. I think part of me was afraid that if I asked too many questions, I wouldn't like the answers. So I smiled, I kissed, I stayed soft, I stayed small. I held on to the beginning as if it could stretch and stretch until it swallowed the middle and the end. But love doesn't work that way. And even in the most beautiful beginnings, sometimes the truth is already quietly planting itself beneath the surface. I just didn't know yet that it would bloom into something I wouldn't be able to ignore. It didn't happen all at once. That's the part that still haunts me. I didn't wake up one day and suddenly feel unloved. It was slower than that. Like water dripping on stone, carving out space until it finally breaks through. He started coming home later. At first, it was just traffic. Then it was meetings. Then it was something vague like just needed air. I wanted to respect his space, to not be controlling. I believed that trust meant letting go of the need to know everything. But it's hard to ignore when the man you love begins to look more like a guest in your shared life. We used to talk about everything, what we were reading, what dreams we had, even what scared us. But now, conversations became short, functional. I'd ask how his day went and he'd say, fine. I'd try to share something small about mine and he'd nod, scrolling through his phone like my voice was background noise. The silence grew, but it wasn't empty, it was loaded, with things unsaid, with feelings unacknowledged. There were times I'd be making dinner, and he'd sit at the counter, not saying a word, just staring into space. I'd look at him and wonder where he had gone inside his own mind. What was so heavy that he wouldn't share it with me? But when I asked, he'd smile like nothing was wrong and change the subject. That smile started to feel like a mask, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he was performing happiness rather than feeling it. I began to watch him more closely, not out of jealousy, but fear. Fear that I was losing him without knowing why. He started locking his phone more often. There was a new password. He wouldn't leave it charging in the living room like before. It was always in his pocket or under his pillow. One night, I reached for it without thinking, and he flinched. Not angrily, just instinctively, like a reflex he couldn't control. He brushed it off, said he was just surprised, but his eyes told another story. That night, I lay awake next to him, staring at the ceiling, trying to quiet the storm in my chest. I told myself I was overthinking, that I was letting my imagination run wild. But deep down, I knew what intuition felt like. And this wasn't paranoia. It was the quiet scream of a heart that knew something was shifting. He began spending more time at the gym. He joined a running group. He started listening to podcasts I'd never heard of, referencing books we'd never talked about. It felt like he was building a world I wasn't part of, and I didn't know how to ask to be let in. So I smiled when I didn't want to. I asked if he was okay, even though I knew the answer would be hollow. I'm just tired, he'd say. Or it's nothing. But it wasn't nothing. I was watching the man I married become a stranger with my face still pressed against the glass, trying to understand what had changed. I started to wonder if I was the problem. Maybe I'd gotten too comfortable. Maybe I wasn't exciting anymore. Maybe love, after the ceremony and the photos and the honeymoon, just faded like old paint. But I still tried. I planned date nights, suggested weekend trips, left little notes in his bag. He smiled and thanked me, but it felt like someone appreciating a gift from a colleague, not a gesture from a wife. There were moments when he looked at me and I could swear he was somewhere else entirely. Once, I caught him staring at a photo on his phone with a look I hadn't seen in months, soft, almost nostalgic. When he noticed me watching, he quickly turned the screen off. He said it was nothing, but something inside me cracked that day. I didn't confront him. I didn't cry. I didn't even ask what the photo was. I just nodded and walked away, and in that silence, I felt something die. It's strange how you can be in the same room with someone and feel completely invisible. I started to talk less, not because I didn't have things to say, but because I didn't know if he was listening. And when someone stops listening, your words begin to feel like a burden. I began journaling again, something I hadn't done in years. I wrote letters I never sent, poems that sounded like confessions. I looked for pieces of myself in memories, trying to remember who I was before I became someone trying to be enough for someone else. The hardest part wasn't the silence, it was pretending it didn't hurt, pretending I was okay, smiling when I served dinner, laughing at things I didn't find funny, keeping the house clean, folding his laundry, touching his arm when he walked by, all in hopes of waking him up from whatever distance he'd chosen. But he wasn't asleep. He was drifting, and I didn't know how to swim after him without drowning myself. I started to understand that absence doesn't always look like someone walking out the door. Sometimes absence sits across the table from you and eats dinner without looking up. Sometimes absence kisses you goodnight and turns the other way. And sometimes absence says I love you with such ease that you almost believe it until you feel the hollow echo it leaves behind. It happened on a Sunday, the kind of Sunday that feels slow and quiet, when the world outside is muted and you can hear your own thoughts louder than usual. He had gone out early, said he was going for a run with his new group. I stayed behind, cleaning up, folding laundry, trying not to spiral into the usual loops of overthinking. I was putting his clothes away when one of the drawers wouldn't close properly. I knelt down, thinking it was just stuck on fabric, but something felt wedged in the back, behind the lining. When I reached in, my fingers touched something cold, thin, and unfamiliar. I pulled it out, and for a moment, I didn't even realize what it was. A phone, not the one he used every day. An older one, unlocked, but fully charged. No case, just sitting there, like it had been waiting for me. My heart didn't race. It stopped, completely, because something in me already knew. I didn't need proof, but there it was, in my hand. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time before turning it on. My fingers trembled, not because I was afraid of what I'd find, but because deep down I already knew exactly what would be there. And I hated that I was right. The first thing that opened was a gallery. Dozens of photos, none of them of me. Pictures of her, of them, in restaurants I'd never been to, laughing in sunlight I hadn't seen. A version of him I hadn't felt in months, alive, present, warm. The kind of smile I used to think was mine. There were videos too, short ones. Him brushing her hair out of her face, her whispering something I couldn't hear, but I didn't need the sound. I could see it in their eyes. Intimacy, comfort, familiarity. It wasn't just an affair. It was a life that ran parallel to mine, hidden in the spaces he thought I'd never search. I checked the messages. They weren't explicit. They were worse. Gentle, soft, real. Did you sleep okay? I miss you already. Next weekend feels too far. I felt the breath leave my body in pieces. I wasn't angry, not in that moment. I was empty, like someone had pulled the floor from under me, and I was still standing out of habit, not stability. I wanted to scream, but no sound came. I just sat there, the phone in my lap, the photos still open, the weight of betrayal settling into my bones. Every lie flashed before me like rewinding film. Every kiss, followed by a message to someone else. Every night he said, I'm just tired, after spending the day loving her. I placed the phone beside me and stared at it like it might apologize. But it didn't. It just sat there. Proof that love can rot quietly in the corners you stop looking. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know who to call. So I didn't move. I waited. Hours passed. He came home smiling, sweating from his run. He kissed me. I let him. I watched his face, trying to see if he could feel the shift. If he knew that I knew. But he didn't. Or maybe he did and was just that good at pretending. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the photos, the softness in his eyes, the words he used to tell me that now lived in someone else's inbox. I lay beside him, quiet, still, broken in a way I didn't yet have words for. I wondered how long it had been going on, if it started before the wedding, if she knew about me, if she was waiting for him to leave, if he had promised her that he would. I felt like a character in someone else's story, like my marriage had been a backdrop for another love. I didn't cry that night. I didn't even touch him. I just stared into the dark, wondering how many more lies I had unknowingly memorized, wondering when he stopped choosing me. And the worst part wasn't the betrayal. It was realizing how much of myself I gave while he was slowly walking away. I wanted to hate him, but I couldn't. I wanted to wake him up and scream and throw the phone at him, but I didn't, because something inside me still wanted this not to be real. Still wanted to wake up and find none of it had happened, but it had. And now I had to live with the truth. I don't know what I'll do yet. Maybe I'll confront him. Maybe I'll walk away without a word. Or maybe I'll stay, just long enough to remember how to breathe again. But if you've come this far into my story, and you felt even a fraction of this ache, please subscribe. Not for me, but for you. For anyone who's ever been in love alone. And if you can, leave a comment. Or share this with someone who might need to hear it. Maybe stories like mine weren't meant to be kept quiet forever. I didn't say anything that morning. He made coffee like usual, humming to himself, wearing the same hoodie he always wore on Sundays. I watched him from the hallway, his back turned, and wondered how someone could look so familiar and feel so far away. The phone was still hidden in the drawer, exactly where I'd found it. Part of me wanted to grab it, slam it on the table, and scream, ask him who she was, how long it had been going on, if he ever looked at me and felt even a flicker of guilt. But another part of me, a quieter, more frightened part, just stood there, frozen. I wasn't ready, not to hear his explanations, not to hear the lies he'd wrap in soft tones. I didn't want to be gaslit, to be told I was crazy, dramatic, insecure. I knew what I'd seen. The truth was already mine, whether he admitted it or not. So I stayed quiet. I said good morning, kissed his cheek, and smiled like nothing had changed, though everything had. It's strange, the things you do to protect yourself when the person who should have protected you is the one who broke you. I spent the next few days pretending, cooking dinner, answering texts, laughing at things that weren't funny. Every time he touched me, I flinched inside, but outside I stayed composed. I started observing him more closely, how he answered calls, how he avoided eye contact during certain moments. I noticed how he took his phone with him everywhere now, even to the bathroom. I wondered if he knew the other phone was missing, if he was panicking inside, or if he truly believed his secret was still safe. I waited for him to say something, to notice that I had changed too, but he never did. Or maybe he did, and chose silence as well. We were both living behind glass walls, pretending not to see each other breaking. At night, when he slept beside me, I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling, rehearsing different ways to confront him. Calm, angry, devastated, rational. But every scenario ended with the same ache in my chest. Because no version of that conversation could undo what I had seen. I didn't want apologies. I didn't want explanations. I wanted the version of him I thought I married, and he didn't exist anymore. One evening, I stood in front of the mirror for a long time, trying to recognize myself. I looked tired, older, not from age, but from disappointment, from holding in too much for too long. I thought about calling my sister, my best friend, anyone, but I didn't. I didn't want their pity. I didn't want their anger on my behalf. I needed to feel it on my own terms, to sit with it, to understand what it meant for me, not for us. I began writing again, not about him, about me, about how I had lost myself trying to be everything for someone who wanted more than I could give, or worse, wanted someone else entirely. I went through photos from our wedding and felt like I was looking at strangers. How could two people smile so fully and mean so little of it just months later? Or maybe he meant it then, and something changed. That thought hurt more, that he loved me once and stopped. That I was enough for a while, but not forever. I tried to retrace when exactly the shift happened. Was it something I said? Something I missed? I searched my memory for signs I hadn't seen, and the more I found, the heavier it felt. I wanted to believe I had loved wisely, that I had chosen someone who chose me too. But now, I wasn't sure if I had been loved at all or just temporarily needed. There's a kind of mourning that comes without death, a grief that doesn't wear black or get condolences. I was living it, quietly, fully. Some nights, I walked around the house after he'd fallen asleep, touching the walls, the furniture, the shelves we built together. It felt like a museum of a love that once lived here. I didn't cry much, not because it didn't hurt, but because the pain was too deep for tears. It sat in my bones, heavy and still. I started imagining life without him, what I'd do, where I'd go, who I'd be. I began saving money quietly, looking at apartments when he wasn't home. Not because I had decided yet, but because I needed to know I had options, that I wasn't trapped, that I could leave, even if I didn't want to. Some days I felt strong, empowered, like I was reclaiming something I didn't even realize I'd lost. Other days I felt hollow, like I was just going through motions, waiting for some external force to make the decision for me. I stopped touching him at night. I turned away in bed. He didn't ask why. He didn't seem to notice. Or he noticed and, like me, chose silence. It was a strange dance we were doing, two people pretending not to feel the elephant in the room. And maybe that's what broke me most. Not the betrayal itself, but the quiet after. The absence of regret, the absence of effort. I wasn't ready to explode. I wasn't ready to leave, but I was changing every day, slowly. And the woman who had once fought so hard to be seen was now starting to see herself. And once you begin to see yourself clearly, it becomes harder to accept being invisible. I didn't wake up one morning and suddenly feel whole again. Healing didn't arrive like a wave, it crept in like sunlight under a door you forgot you left cracked open. At first, it was small things. The way I started brushing my hair slower. The way I stood longer in the shower, not rushing to finish before he noticed the water running. I began to listen to music I loved again, not the playlists we built together, but the songs I used to dance to when I was 17 before love got so heavy. I didn't call it healing at the time. I called it survival. Quiet, steady, unnoticed survival. There were days I still felt numb. Days I didn't want to get out of bed. But on others, I found myself humming while washing the dishes or standing by the window just to watch the sky change color. I started remembering parts of myself I had forgotten. The girl who used to write poems on napkins. The woman who loved sunrises even if she rarely woke up early enough to see them. The friend who could sit with someone in silence and make them feel heard. I missed her. And slowly, I started inviting her back. I bought a notebook and filled the first page with a sentence I hadn't said aloud in a long time. I deserve softness. And I did. Not the kind that came with apologies after betrayal, but the kind I could give myself without asking for permission. I stopped blaming myself for his choices. That took time, but eventually, I understood that someone else's dishonesty is not a reflection of my worth. I could have been perfect, he still would have lied. That truth, as painful as it was, freed me. It allowed me to stop performing, to stop shrinking. I no longer needed to fold myself into a quieter shape just to keep someone beside me. I started spending time alone, not lonely, just alone. I went to cafes with a book. I walked around the city with no destination, letting the air fill spaces inside me I didn't know were empty. I stopped checking his phone. I didn't need to anymore. The obsession with proof had passed. I had already seen enough. Now, I was looking for something else, traces of myself. And I found them in the way I smiled at strangers again, in how I started taking pictures of things that made me feel something. Trees in the wind, rain on windows, my own shadow at sunset. I signed up for a pottery class. It felt random, but something about shaping clay with my hands made me feel like I was creating something that wouldn't betray me. The first thing I made was a crooked cup. I kept it anyway, not because it was beautiful, but because it was mine. I stopped waiting for him to notice I had changed. He didn't, or maybe he did, and it scared him. He asked me once if everything was okay. I said yes. I wasn't lying, I was just finally starting to be okay with myself, even if we weren't okay together. I didn't owe him the whole story of my healing, not anymore. I was writing it for myself now. I stopped sleeping, facing him. I stopped asking where he was going, what time he'd be back. I didn't do it to punish him. I did it to stop exhausting myself. I no longer wanted to chase someone who had already decided to walk away emotionally. Instead, I chased my own peace. I decluttered the house. I got rid of the candles we bought together, the mugs that reminded me of weekend mornings that were never as perfect as I tried to believe. I put up new pictures, photos of myself laughing, alone or with friends. Not to erase him, but to take up space again. My space. I still hadn't decided what I was going to do, whether I'd leave or ask him to, but I was preparing, and that preparation was sacred. It was mine. I didn't talk to many people about it. I didn't post. I didn't vent. I held it close, like a fragile thing I was trying to protect while it grew roots. Sometimes the quietest seasons are the most transformative. Sometimes strength doesn't look like action, it looks like stillness. I wasn't seeking revenge. I didn't want him to suffer. I just didn't want to disappear anymore. I didn't want to keep editing myself in hopes of becoming someone easier to love. I wanted to be me again, flawed, real, fully present. And being me meant letting go of the parts of the relationship I kept trying to salvage. I stopped rereading the messages on that hidden phone. They didn't matter anymore. She wasn't the one who broke me, he was. And he would have, no matter who she was. But I wouldn't let that be the end of my story. I started imagining the kind of life I wanted, not out of spite, out of hope. A small apartment with light pouring through the windows, quiet mornings, music playing while I cooked just for me, laughter with friends, a peace that didn't depend on someone else's loyalty. I stopped needing closure from him. I realized closure isn't something someone gives you, it's something you decide to accept. The moment you stop waiting for someone to be who they promised and start becoming who you needed all along. That's where I was now, in the middle. of that becoming, not healed, not whole, but here, still standing, still soft, still mine. I never told him goodbye, not in words, not in a letter. There was no dramatic confrontation, no suitcase by the door, no shouting in the rain. It was quieter than that, softer, like a candle slowly burning down to its final flicker. I simply stopped waiting. One morning, I opened my eyes and didn't feel the need to look at his side of the bed. I got up, made coffee just for me, and didn't ask where he was going or when he'd be back. I stopped checking the clock when he was late, stopped flinching when he smiled at his phone. There was no final blow, no explosion, just a gradual release of all the things I had been clinging to, one by one. I don't know exactly when I knew I was done. Maybe it was the night I stood in front of the mirror and realized I hadn't seen myself clearly in months. Or the morning I looked out the window and imagined starting over, not with someone new, but with myself. I think it was 100 tiny moments that added up to one truth I couldn't ignore anymore. I deserved more than surviving inside someone else's half-hearted love. I started packing a few things, not all at once, slowly, with care. A sweater here, a book there, my favorite mug that only I ever used. I rented a small place across town, just a studio, nothing grand, but it had light and space and silence that didn't hurt. I told him I was going to visit a friend for a few days. He didn't ask which friend. He didn't ask when I'd be back. I think deep down he knew. Maybe he was waiting for it too. That kind of silence isn't accidental. I left a note not to explain, not to accuse, just to say thank you for the love that was real when it was real, for the moments that did mean something. I didn't want to carry hate with me. I had already carried enough. The first night alone, I sat on the floor of my new place, surrounded by boxes and quiet, and I cried, not because I regretted it, but because choosing yourself, after so long, choosing someone else, is its own kind of grief. I didn't miss him. I missed who I was when I thought I was loved. I missed believing in us. But I didn't want that kind of love back, not anymore. I wanted a different kind of love. One that made room for my whole self. One that didn't ask me to beg for attention or settle for crumbs. I wanted peace, and I was beginning to find it. Slowly, life started blooming in small ways. I cooked meals and sat at the table, alone, in silence, and for the first time, it didn't feel empty. I filled my walls with words and images that reminded me of who I was becoming. I planted a little herb garden on the windowsill. I started calling people back, letting laughter return to my chest. I went entire days without thinking of him, and when I did, it didn't sting as sharply. It was like remembering an old version of myself, a girl who thought love meant sacrificing everything. I was learning now that love begins where self-abandonment ends. I don't tell this story to vilify him. I tell it because someone out there might be sitting in that same silence, wondering if they're imagining things, wondering if love is supposed to feel this lonely. It's not. If you're listening to this and something in you aches, please know you're not crazy. You're not asking for too much. You're asking the wrong person. And maybe, like me, you've given so many chances that your hands no longer feel like your own. Maybe you're trying to stay soft in a world that's been so hard to you. Maybe you've been waiting for a sign. Sometimes the sign is the story of someone who found the courage to begin again. I don't know what your story is. I just know mine couldn't stay quiet anymore. If it reached you, if it made you feel less alone, I hope you'll stay. Subscribe, not just for me, but to keep stories like this alive. So voices like mine, and maybe like yours, don't get buried in silence. If this touched something in you, leave a comment. Sometimes your words are the lifeline someone else needs. And if you want to keep walking with me through other stories, like this real, raw, human, the playlist is waiting. You'll find the link in the description or in the comments below. I hope we meet again there, because some stories deserve to keep being heard.